I didn't expect to be here. Not on a Friday night, crouched on the faded carpet of my friend's apartment, trying to fix a wobbly coffee table while listening to his sister humming from the kitchen. And yet, here I was, because he had plans, and apparently, the universe decided I should stay. She appeared from around the corner, a cup of tea in hand, mid-40s but carrying herself like she could walk into a boardroom or a rock concert with the same ease. Her hair was loosely pinned up, strands falling around her face, and her blouse, something soft and beige, looked like it had been caught in a breeze just right. I froze for a second because she smiled, not at me, not exactly, but in a way that seemed to invite me into her orbit anyway. "Need help with that?" she asked, setting the cup down carefully on the coffee table. Her voice had warmth, but it also had a precision, like she measured her words before letting them escape. Yeah, maybe," I said, fumbling with the screwdriver. I could feel my fingers stiffen, almost absurdly, and she laughed softly, a sound that didn't fill the room but lingered like a note held too long. She crouched beside me, just close enough that our knees almost touched, and examined the wobbly leg. "It's simple," she said, tapping it gently. "The screw's loose. Not hard to fix." Her fingers brushed mine for the briefest moment as she handed me the screwdriver, and I had to fight the urge to keep my hand on hers, just to feel the warmth. We worked side by side, silent mostly, and I noticed the way her eyes tracked the table rather than me, like she was guarding something, but the softness in her glance betrayed her a little. I wanted to say something clever, to fill the silence, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I just tightened the screw and pretended I wasn't aware of the electricity buzzing in the space between us. "You're careful," she said finally, watching me adjust the last leg. There was something in her tone, neither praise nor critique, that made me feel both seen and awkward at the same time. I glanced up. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second, her lips twitching as if she wanted to say more but decided against it. And in that instant, the apartment seemed smaller, more intimate. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of tea, the dim glow of the lamp. All of it conspiring to make this moment feel heavier than it should. Then she stood, brushing off her hands, and I realized just how much I'd been holding my breath. She leaned just slightly closer, as if reading the finished table herself, and murmured, "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all." Her eyes lingered on mine a heartbeat too long, and I felt a strange tug, a mix of admiration, something unnameable, and a curiosity I wasn't ready to admit aloud. She smiled again, turned, and walked to the couch. That's when she sat down, patting the space beside her with a casualness that suggested she knew more than she let on. I hesitated. My heart was doing something ridiculous in my chest, and I couldn't quite explain why. And then she said, almost in a whisper, almost to herself, "Now it's just us." I froze. Her words weren't a command. They weren't even an invitation, exactly. But something in the way she said them made the air between us feel charged, a current I couldn't step away from even if I tried. And I haven't stopped thinking about it since. Saturday morning arrived with a kind of quiet that felt almost intentional, like the city itself was holding its breath. I found myself back at her apartment, ostensibly to help rearrange the bookshelves, though I knew the real reason was harder to name. She opened the door before I could knock, hair pulled back in a loose bun this time, and her robe tied casually at the waist. "Did you bring the screws?" she asked, not looking at me directly. There was a faint edge to her tone, practical, almost guarded, but it didn't entirely hide a flicker of something softer beneath. "Yeah," I said, stepping in. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and vanilla, like yesterday hadn't ended at all. I noticed the small crease near her eyes when she smiled, a fatigue I didn't remember seeing before, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other as if the world was slightly too heavy. We started pulling books from the shelves, a silent rhythm forming between us. I watched her hands, the long, careful fingers that lingered over spines, the faint tremor when she reached for one of the heavier volumes. It struck me how effortless she made the task look while every now and then a shadow crossed her face, a hesitation I couldn't place. "You don't have to do it all yourself," I said quietly, handing her a stack. My voice felt small in the stillness. She paused, glanced at me, and for a fraction of a second, the wall around her faltered. She exhaled sharply, almost apologetically, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I know. I like to know it's done right, she admitted, and it came out quieter than she probably intended, almost a confession. I nodded, careful not to overstep, but I felt the pull, the way her shoulders tensed, then relaxed slightly as she returned to the books. She didn't need me to fix the shelves. She needed someone to notice that sometimes she wanted help without saying it outright. We worked in silence for a while, the only sound the scraping of books against wood and the occasional soft sigh from her. I found myself stealing glances, how her robe slipped a little at the shoulder when she reached up, the quick exhale when she set down a heavy volume, the faint curve of her lips when she thought no one was watching. Each small motion felt charged, unintentional but undeniable. When I stepped back to examine the progress, she caught my gaze and held it longer than usual. Her eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, seemed to weigh something, like she was considering whether to let me see a part of her she rarely showed anyone. Maybe that shelf should go there, she murmured, pointing to a corner of the room. Her voice was softer now, hesitant, almost vulnerable, and I realized I was holding my breath. Sounds perfect, I said, and my hands itched to move, to adjust the books for her, but I held back. She was fragile in a way that wasn't obvious, strong, but carrying a quiet kind of exhaustion that drew me in without me even trying. She turned back to the shelf, brushing her fingers across the spines, and then, without looking at me, said, almost as if testing the air, "Thanks for noticing." I froze for a heartbeat. Noticing. That word lingered between us, heavier than the books themselves, softer than the hum of the city outside. And then she glanced over her shoulder, eyes locking with mine for just a second, and smiled that small, careful smile again. The kind of smile that makes you wait, makes you lean closer, even when you know you shouldn't. I stayed frozen a moment longer, letting it sink in. She didn't speak after that, but somehow, the space between us was heavier, full of a tension that neither of us named, yet both of us felt. The rain tapped against the window in an uneven rhythm, a half-hearted percussion that matched the way my thoughts scattered. I was still at her apartment, supposedly to help her sort through old files she'd been avoiding for weeks. But the storm made the room feel smaller, cozier, somehow more charged. She moved around the space with quiet efficiency, carrying a stack of papers, her robe loosely tied, hair slightly damp from the drizzle that had caught her on the balcony. We worked in silence, side by side, and for the first time, the air felt almost unbearably close. My chest tightened when our elbows brushed, a fleeting contact, entirely accidental, but enough to make me swallow hard. She glanced at me, caught the hesitation in my eyes, and smiled faintly, but she didn't comment. That smile was her shield, her way of saying, "Notice me, but don't cross the line." I wanted to cross the line. "Here," she said softly, handing me a file. Her hand lingered on mine longer than necessary, a spark of warmth that neither of us acknowledged aloud. I felt the urge to pull her hand back, or maybe to hold it, but I didn't. I didn't dare. A sudden buzz from her phone shattered the quiet. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and muttered, "It's nothing." But I could see the tension tighten her shoulders. I wondered briefly who it was, an ex, a friend, someone from work? Whatever it was enough to pull her attention away from me, and yet the subtle tremor in her fingers lingered when she set the phone aside. We returned to the files, sorting, stacking, shuffling, and I realized how much I was noticing. The way her eyes lingered on the papers instead of me, how she occasionally bit her lip when she thought I wasn't looking, the faint scent of rain in her hair mixing with something softer, cinnamon, maybe, or vanilla. At one point, she reached up to adjust a high shelf, and I instinctively moved closer, just in case she wobbled. Our shoulders brushed again, this time deliberately, or maybe it just felt deliberate, and I had to bite back a laugh to keep my voice from shaking. She caught my glance and raised an eyebrow, a subtle challenge hiding in the curve of her lips. The storm outside picked up, a low rumble of thunder that made the room pulse with an almost tangible tension. My hands itched to do more than shuffle papers. I wanted to brush the damp hair from her face, wanted to ask if she ever felt like this closeness was dangerous, wanted to confess something I didn't have words for. But I didn't. Instead, I cleared my throat and said something banal about the files, something that sounded too rehearsed even to me. She gave me a look, half amused, half aware, and returned to the task at hand. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The storm pressed against the windows, and the warmth between us was undeniable. I caught her looking at me once, just for a second, and in that second, everything hovered on the edge. Our knees were practically touching, our hands had met, and the room seemed to shrink to nothing but us. And then the phone buzzed again, a sharp interruption, and she straightened, pulling the moment apart before it could become anything. I forced myself to step back, to return to the paperwork, but the memory of her hand brushing mine lingered. I didn't move closer again. Not yet. But I couldn't stop thinking about what almost happened. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt heavy, like the walls had learned to listen. I was perched on the edge of the couch, staring at the floorboards, and she was across the room, leaning against the counter with her arms folded. The storm had passed hours ago, leaving a faint scent of wet asphalt and cold air lingering in the windows. We didn't speak at first, just the occasional rustle of papers, the clink of a coffee mug being set down. But the silence wasn't empty. It was thick, almost suffocating, and I could feel it pressing against my ribs. Finally, she let out a slow breath, like she had been holding something in for far too long. "Do you ever wonder why we're here?" Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, but it carried a weight I hadn't been prepared for. I looked up, and our eyes met. She wasn't smiling, wasn't teasing, wasn't guarded in the usual way. She just looked tired, almost raw. Sometimes, I said, fumbling for words that wouldn't come. She shook her head slightly, running a hand over her face. "It's not about the shelves, or the books, or even you helping me. It's everything else. This, whatever this is." Her eyes found mine again, searching for an answer I didn't have. I wanted to say something clever, something that could untangle the mess of emotions that had been building between us, but all I could do was sit there and let her words hang in the air. "You make it complicated," she continued, voice trembling just a little. "And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's supposed to be complicated, but it doesn't feel fair to either of us." I swallowed, my throat dry, and noticed the way her hands curled into loose fists at her sides. For a second, she looked like she might cry, and the sight cut through me more sharply than I expected. "I don't know what to do," she admitted finally, a confession so quiet that it could have been swallowed by the hum of the apartment. And yet it struck me like lightning. She was letting me see a crack in her carefully constructed world, a vulnerability she rarely showed anyone. I wanted to reach for her, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I stayed silent, letting the space between us do the talking. The tension that had been simmering, small touches, shared glances, unspoken thoughts, suddenly felt enormous, impossible to ignore. She moved a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "I can't keep pretending this is normal. Not with you. Not with how it makes me feel. And I don't even know what that is half the time." The honesty hung in the room, heavy and suffocating. My heart raced, but I said nothing. I just let her words land, each one a small revelation, a small wound. She finally sat on the edge of the couch, only a few inches from me, and let out a shaky breath. I'm scared of what I want," she whispered. And then she did something I didn't expect. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes, leaving the truth dangling between us like a fragile thread. I wanted to tell her it was okay. I wanted to tell her I felt it too. But instead, I just watched her, helpless, and the silence that followed was louder than any touch could ever be. And then she said it, the line that settled into my chest and wouldn't leave. "I don't know if I can trust myself around you." It was quiet again, but different this time, the kind of quiet that carries weight instead of tension. I was flipping through a stack of old photographs she had pulled from a drawer, just trying to help her organize them, though neither of us said it out loud. Her hands hovered over one photo, hesitating, and I could see the conflict in the slight furrow of her brow. "That was a long time ago," she murmured, almost to herself, as she set the picture on the table. It was a younger version of her, standing in a garden with someone I didn't recognize at first. Then I noticed his face, someone familiar in the vague, ghostly way of memories that linger longer than they should. "Who is he?" I asked softly, careful not to press, but unable to hide the curiosity in my voice. She blinked, and for a moment, I saw her falter. "Someone I loved," she said, the words careful, measured, but carrying a quiet ache. "A long time ago, before life got complicated." I nodded, unsure how to respond. I could see the tremor in her hands as she picked up another photograph. She didn't speak for a long time, just let her fingers trace the edges of the images. I noticed the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the small sigh she released, like each memory weighed more than the last. "You remind me a little of him," I said finally, hesitant, and immediately regretted it, worried I had overstepped. Her head snapped up, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her expression. "Do I?" she asked, voice quiet but not unkind. "Yeah," I admitted, "not in everything. But something. The way you notice things, the way you carry yourself. It's familiar." She didn't answer right away. Her lips pressed together, eyes flicking down at the floor. Then she whispered, almost brokenly, "I didn't think anyone could feel familiar without bringing back everything I lost." That line landed heavier than I expected. I could feel my chest tighten. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would make it okay, but the right words didn't exist yet. She set the photos aside and reached for a small envelope I hadn't noticed earlier. "I found this while I was cleaning," she said, sliding it across the table to me. My fingers brushed hers lightly, and I felt the spark again, brief but undeniable. Inside was a letter, folded neatly, the handwriting elegant but faded with time. "I never sent this," she said softly. "I didn't have the courage. Maybe I still don't." I hesitated, then opened it. The words inside weren't dramatic, weren't begging or accusing. They were simple, honest confessions, an unspoken love that had been left behind, a loss she carried quietly. I looked up at her, and our eyes met, both of us caught in the same unexpected vulnerability. For a moment, the room felt suspended. Not charged, exactly, but fragile, like we had crossed an invisible threshold without moving an inch. And then she said, barely above a whisper, "I don't know if I can ever stop remembering him, or feeling like I shouldn't want more than I had back then." I felt my chest tighten again, not from fear, but from the sheer honesty of it. A moment later, she looked away, as if sharing it had exhausted her, leaving a quiet tremor in the space between us. I didn't speak. I didn't move. But I couldn't stop staring, couldn't stop feeling the weight of what she had just let me see. And for the first time, I realized that the distance between us wasn't just physical. It was all the lost words, the regrets, the memories we hadn't yet dared to touch. We didn't speak for a long time after the letter. The rain had returned, soft this time, a steady whisper against the windows. The apartment smelled faintly of old paper and brewed coffee, the kind of scent that felt like it belonged to a life you didn't quite remember living. I sat on the couch, she across from me, both of us pretending to sort books, but really just existing in the same space. Her fingers brushed mine again when she reached for a stack of papers, a brief contact that felt heavier this time. Not charged, exactly, but grounding. It was the kind of touch that said, without words, "I see you. I'm here. We can be here together." "You're quiet today," she murmured. "I'm thinking," I said, and she gave me a look that didn't demand more. She understood that some things didn't need to be said aloud. She sighed, leaning back into the cushions, and I noticed the way her shoulders softened, the faint exhale that carried more than just air. It carried relief, hesitation, recognition. We were both aware of the spaces we had crossed, the tension we'd skirted, and the walls that had finally started to crumble. I wanted to reach out, but I waited, letting her set the pace. Slowly, she shifted closer, just a fraction, enough that our knees brushed. My chest tightened, not from panic, but from the simple, undeniable truth that we were here together, and it felt right without needing to be declared. She started, then stopped, as if even starting a sentence carried too much weight. Instead, she simply rested her hand near mine on the armrest. Our fingers touched lightly, brushing, curling around each other almost instinctively. That small contact said more than words could have. We leaned back slightly, settling into the couch, and for a long moment, there was nothing but quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't press or demand, just holds. I could feel her presence like a pulse beside me, steady and reassuring, and it was enough. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" she asked softly, almost rhetorical. "No," I said, and my voice was quieter than I meant it to be, but firm enough. She didn't smile, not yet, but her eyes held a glimmer of something I couldn't name. Relief, trust, maybe the barest trace of hope. She tilted her head just slightly, brushing her forehead against mine for a fraction of a second, and it was intimate without needing flourish. The room felt smaller, warmer, the outside world receding into faint echoes. Everything that had been tangled between us, the hesitation, the longing, the near misses, settled into a kind of quiet understanding. We didn't say more. There was no confession, no dramatic moment. Just the weight of shared space, the careful brush of our hands, and the slow acknowledgement that some things, when they finally arrive, don't need to be rushed or explained. I watched her adjust the papers beside her, felt the faint warmth of her hand against mine, and realized that the story wasn't about the storm or the past. It was about being here, now, together. And for the first time, it felt like enough. It's quiet now, and I'm sitting here thinking back on all of it. The rain-soaked nights, the accidental touches, the long silences that said more than any words could. I remember her smile when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her fingers lingered just a moment too long on a book, the tired tilt of her head when she confessed pieces of herself I didn't know anyone else had ever seen. Somehow, through all the hesitation and the near misses, something shifted. We didn't fall into a movie-perfect romance. There were no grand declarations, no cinematic embraces. What we found was quieter, steadier, but no less profound. The understanding that you can care for someone in a way that is both consuming and gentle, that the right presence can change the shape of your day without demanding it. I can see it in the small things now, how she laughs without guarding it, how I notice details I never would have before, how we can sit together in silence and feel it like a kind of warmth. The world outside didn't change, but we did. I learned that closeness isn't about rushing, that love can be slow, patient, and still sweep you off your feet. And I think she learned that someone can see all the pieces of you, your past regrets, your quiet heartbreaks, and still choose to be near. There's a moment I keep returning to in my mind. She had leaned forward, a casual brush of her hand against mine, and for the first time, I felt that quiet inevitability. Some connections aren't loud or obvious. They don't demand a storm or a confession. They simply exist, and you realize, in retrospect, that they were always meant to be. Life has moved forward, as it does, but that thread between us is still there. Stronger for the patience, for the honesty, for the moments we didn't force into words. It's funny how the smallest gestures, the way she tilts her head, the way I pause to hand her a cup of coffee, carry the weight of everything we've learned about trust, desire, and the slow unfolding of intimacy. And I think that's the thing about love like this. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's patient. And sometimes, it's the kind of love that teaches you more about yourself than anyone ever could. I glance around the apartment, now tidy, the rain a soft memory outside. I know we'll keep learning each other, that some days will feel heavier than others, but there's a comfort in that. In knowing someone sees you, really sees you, and chooses to stay. And in that quiet, I smile, because sometimes the most profound moments are the ones no one else notices. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?